Thank you. So as you probably heard earlier today, if you were here for the opening panel, one of OpenStreetMap US's priorities is convening stakeholders using OpenStreetMap data, from volunteers mapping locally in their communities to companies using OpenStreetMap data in their products, as well as the federal government. So next slide, please. So as governments and federal agencies have shown increased interest in using OpenStreetMap, as well as actively using OpenStreetMap in their work, OpenStreetMap US has developed the government committee to convene these government stakeholders together around the shared goal of, around the shared goal of using OpenStreetMap data for data in, so using OpenStreetMap data for closing those data gaps and working together across agencies for data exchange. Next slide, please. So when we formed the government committee, one of the first questions that came up around data exchange was, how do we expand this work? So right now, government data can be used by OpenStreetMap as a public domain data set, but how do we expand that and leverage the power of the OpenStreetMap community to get OpenStreetMap data back into government data sets? So we started with a pilot project to get OpenStreetMap community members to map for targeted data needs for users like the Federal Railroad Administration. Next slide. And to do that, we're building public domain map. And when this is completed, what this will do is it'll allow these crowdsourcing groups to, at the same time, contribute data both to OpenStreetMap and to government data sets to close these data gaps and improve the interoperability between these different user groups. And one thing that we're working to achieve with public domain map is to also have an avenue for authoritative data review of this information, as well as work with the different licenses between public domain and OpenStreetMap data.
All right, next slide. There you go. So one of the initial ideas behind this was based on this project called the National Map Corps from the USGS. And even before that, they've been doing this project where they go out to different counties and they ask for the information to be annotated and sent back to them. The National Map Corps is a digital way of doing that and allowing anybody to just go in and make edits. And that's kind of the first step behind what we're thinking of for public domain map. So next slide. I thought there was one in the middle here. So what we're doing is we're taking that information about from the public domain, and we're also sending it to our database separately than the ODBL license. So these are a little bit tricky. You can't really bring data into out of OpenStreetMap. You can bring it in, but getting it back is going to be a problem. So we need to keep them separated. So next slide. So that's the idea here. It will come in from the users and it will separate out to OpenStreetMap and to the federal government. And that building kind of looks like this one. All right.
Thank you. Next slide. So here's a bit about the architecture. The idea is that there's a separate database that is all in the public domain, and it's based on the OpenStreetMap stack of technology, which is really great because there's just hundreds and hundreds of projects that incorporate OpenStreetMap, and it's a common data language, so no matter what data that you have coming in, it can be translated to OSM and then translated back out later. Next slide. And we're basing this off the humanitarian OpenStreetMap team's disaster relief tasking manager. So you bring in your data, or you start with just an empty slate. You go into our tasking manager, create a task where people can go in, and it breaks up your target area into little squares, and any contributor from around the world can go in, get involved, create data, and then the data goes back to you. You can validate that data, and if it's great, you can save it, and there'll be a workflow to go back into OpenStreetMap as well. If it's not great, you send it back to the mappers, and that's how you can harness the power of of the commons and crowdsourced mapping within your agency. And I encourage anyone who's interested to talk to myself or to Maggie, and also check out further information at Mapping USA virtual conference, which is happening next week. Thanks so much.